Well, hey, what's up? In this video, we're just going to be doing an overview of Keyshot's interface so we can get a broad idea of what it's capable of and then how we can go about using it. Alrighty, so let's dive in here and talk about the UI. I'm in Keyshot 10. My computer fan is already making a bunch of noise. The first thing I see is pretty blank, and that is not what we want. So to get the layout that we can work well in, let's go to the top left drop down here and select the default workspace. And also while we're here, let's switch the theme to dark. Because trust me, this light theme is just criminal. It'll just fry your eyes over time, especially when it's 3 a.m. You've been staring at the screen for 12 hours straight because you can't get that metallic flake to look right on your tablet projector project that
really shouldn't have metallic flake in the first place, but you're sleep deprived, you're stressed, you have no capacity for making good decisions, but you still have to present.
Anyways, this looks much better now. Now there are 5 major components of the UI that I want to talk about today. First, the render view, the library panel on the left, the project panel on the right, the top bar called the ribbon, and the bottom bar called the toolbar. The render view here is the 3D workspace, which shows the result of your 3D geometry with materials and lighting. You can look around and navigate by left-click dragging to orbit the view, middle mouse wheel dragging to pan the view, and scrolling the middle mouse wheel to zoom in and out. Now you probably notice that every time you update the viewport, this noise appears and slowly starts to fade. This is Keyshot calculating all the lighting and materials slowly over time. And this happens so slow because Keyshot is literally calculating the journey of each ray of light that gets to the camera view. This is how most render engines do it. The metric Keyshot uses to describe the level of detail that it is currently calculated is called samples. The more samples there are means the more precise and detailed the rendering calculation is. We'll be going over samples in much more detail in later videos. So onto the left panel now. This is called the library panel, and this is where you'll find a bunch of pre-made assets that come with Keyshot. There are 8 tabs here, but I really only use 3 of them, and those are materials, environment, and favorites. With the material and environments, you can drag and drop these assets in the viewport here, and they'll be applied in your scene. Each material will be applied to the geometry of an entire part or body, and if there is already a material applied, the old one will simply be replaced. For environments, just drag and drop anywhere in the viewport, and it'll change the environment. There can only be one environment at a time, so this will replace any environment that you currently have. Now there are so many materials and environments here, and not all of them are that good. So when you find some good ones that you like, or in the future when you make your own, you can right-click and add them to the favorites folder. Then they'll be much easier to find next time in the favorites tab. Onto the panel on the right called the project panel. And this is where you'll do all your fine-tuning of the elements and parameters in your scene, and you'll probably spend most of your time here. The scene tab here shows all the 3D models and their parts that are in this current scene. This will correlate to how you split up the bodies in CAD before you import them into Keyshot. Here you can easily hide components by toggling this eyeball, or delete them from the scene. It can also be a good way to select certain parts in a more complicated scene if you've done a good job naming them. The material tab is where you can fine-tune the parameters of the materials you applied moments ago. When you want to create your own materials, this is where you'll do that as well. When you're in this tab, it'll only show one material at a time, and in order to change between materials, just double-click the material in the viewport and it should update in the material panel. The camera tab is where you can manage the settings of the camera views in your scene and even save different views in your scene that you can switch between. If you take a moment to look around some of these settings, it's worth noting that there are a lot of the same settings that you would find on a real camera, like focal length and f-stop. If you click this icon here with the plus sign, it'll create a new camera with the settings of your current view. Try creating a few different angles, and then you can easily switch between them just by selecting them, and we'll also go into more details on cameras in later videos. The environment tab is where you can adjust the overall lighting of the scene. Once again, you can fine-tune the presets that you applied from the library panel, or you can create your own environment. Just like with the cameras panel, you can create new environments that you can switch between by clicking the icon here with the plus sign. Now the lighting tab can be easily confused with the environment tab. So just to be clear, the environment tab that we just talked about essentially allows you to adjust the position, color, and intensity of the light sources, while the lighting tab allows you to fine-tune exactly how Keyshot is calculating how the light from those sources will react to the geometry and materials you have in the scene. And we'll be covering more about this topic in later videos because it's a preview into how Keyshot and other render engines work at a fundamental level. But for now though, you'll likely be fine with either basic or the product presets. And finally, the image tab is for post-processing effects like adjusting exposure or adding a vignette or chromatic aberration. I think of this as sort of a layer sitting on top of the render view, and you can see that adjusting the parameters here does not cause Keyshot to start resampling and updating in the viewport. It's kind of like adjusting colors in Photoshop, but you can do basic adjustments here. You can save different presets here as well. Alright, now we're going to talk about the top bar here called the ribbon. This is pretty simple. It just gives you quick access to some commands that you might use often. You can hide or show any button here by right-clicking and toggling them, or you can hide the whole bar altogether in the Windows tab. It is really nice to have though, so I usually just keep it open. Oh, if you have a GPU on your computer, I highly suggest you check the GPU rendering here. It is so much faster than rendering with your CPU, which is what Keyshot will do by default. And finally, we have the bottom bar called the Toolbar. This again gives you just a few quick commands, like importing a file into your scene, hide or show the library or project panels. You could bring up a timeline if you want to do some animation, or you can quickly open up the dialog box for exporting or rendering. These two buttons here are for a very specific use case, and we probably won't even be talking about them and what they're used for in this tutorial series. Okay, so we've talked about each major part of the Keyshot UI, but before we move on, I just want to show you that all these panels and the tabs within the panels are totally movable. You can click and drag them around to most parts of the screen, except not above or below the viewport, which frustrates me far more than it really should. Don't worry about screwing up the layout though, because you can always revert back to the default up here in the Workspace dropdown. And if you create a layout you like better, you can just save it here and always go back if you need. Okay, so that's it for this video. It was just a quick overview of the main UI of Keyshot. So hopefully you learned something new. It's pretty quick, pretty basic stuff. So that's it.